What if the simplest words could save a life? Rosa Delgado had been serving coffee and apple pie at Sal's Diner for 43 years, and she knew every regular by heart. She knew which customer took cream but no sugar, who'd lost a spouse, and who needed an extra smile on a Monday morning. But on this particular Thursday evening in September, Rosa learned something that made her hands shake as she poured coffee into the worn ceramic mug. The man in the corner booth, the one everyone called Mr. Vincent, ordered the same thing he always did: meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and a side of green beans. She'd served him for decades, watched silver creep into his dark hair, noticed the weight of the world settling deeper into his shoulders each year. Tonight, though, something felt different. As she approached his table with her notepad, she realized that speaking 5 simple words would change both their lives forever. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Rosa had started working at Sal's Diner back in 1981, fresh off the bus from San Antonio, with nothing but a borrowed suitcase and her grandmother's cross around her neck. The neighborhood had been different then, full of families who knew each other's names, corner stores where you could buy penny candy, and restaurants where the same faces showed up every week like clockwork. Sal's was one of those places. It sat on the corner of 5th and Madison, its red vinyl booths cracked from years of use, the black and white checkered floor worn smooth by countless footsteps. The neon sign outside flickered sometimes, but Sal always said it gave the place character. Mr. Vincent had been coming to the diner for nearly as long as Rosa had worked there. He always sat in the same booth by the window, always ordered the same meal, and always left a $20 tip no matter how small his bill was. Over the years, they'd developed the kind of friendship that doesn't need many words. She knew he'd lost his wife to cancer 15 years ago. She knew he had a daughter somewhere out west who didn't call much anymore. He knew Rosa's husband had passed suddenly from a heart attack, knew she had 3 grandchildren she adored, and knew Thursday nights were hard for her because that's when Luis used to take her dancing. The other waitresses whispered about Mr. Vincent. They said he was connected to people you didn't want to know. They said his money didn't come from honest work. Rosa didn't care much for gossip. She'd seen how gentle his hands were when he turned the pages of the newspaper, how he always asked about her family, how his eyes grew soft and distant when children laughed in the booth behind him. Whatever he'd done in his life, she figured everyone deserved kindness and a hot meal. That Thursday started like any other. Rosa had clocked in at 4 o'clock, tied her apron around her waist, and tucked a fresh pen behind her ear. The dinner rush came and went. Families celebrating birthdays, couples on dates, truck drivers stopping for coffee on long hauls. By 7:30, the crowd had thinned to just a handful of customers. That's when Mr. Vincent walked through the door, his dark coat buttoned against the autumn chill, his face lined with a tiredness that seemed deeper than usual. "Evening. Rosa," he said, sliding into his usual booth. His voice was gravelly but warm, like old leather. "Evening, Mr. Vincent," she replied, already reaching for the coffee pot. She knew his order by heart, but the ritual mattered. "The usual tonight?" He nodded, folding his hands on the table. "That'd be perfect." Rosa walked back toward the kitchen, calling out the order to Tommy, the cook who'd been working the grill for 20 years. Tommy was a good man, raised 4 kids on his own after his wife left, never complained, never missed a shift. As she clipped the order ticket to the spinner, she noticed something odd. Danny, the new busboy who'd started last week, was standing near the prep station, his hands fidgeting nervously with a dish rag. He was talking in low tones to someone Rosa didn't recognize, a younger man in an expensive suit who didn't belong in the kitchen. "Everything all right back here?" Rosa asked, her instincts prickling. Danny jumped, dropping the dish rag. Yeah, all good, Rosa." His smile was too quick, too forced. The man in the suit glanced at her, then at Danny, before walking out through the back door. Something about the exchange made Rosa's stomach tighten. She'd lived long enough to recognize trouble when it wore a nice suit. She'd also lived long enough to know when to mind her business and when to pay attention. She pushed the feeling aside and continued her rounds, refilling coffee cups, clearing plates, chatting with Mrs. Henderson about her daughter's new baby. But her eyes kept drifting back to the kitchen, watching Danny move between tables with jerky, nervous energy. When Tommy rang the bell signaling Mr. Vincent's order was ready, Rosa grabbed the plate, automatically checking it the way she always did, making sure everything looked right, that the meatloaf was hot, the potatoes properly mashed. That's when she saw it. Just a glimpse, really. Barely noticeable unless you'd been watching food come off this grill for 4 decades. The meatloaf had a faint discoloration along one edge, and there was an odd, slightly bitter smell that didn't belong. Her heart started to pound. She glanced up and caught Danny watching her from across the diner, his face pale and sweating. Their eyes met for just a second before he looked away quickly. Too quickly. Rosa's hands began to tremble as she carried the plate toward Mr. Vincent's booth. She'd served thousands of meals in this place, knew every smell and sight of Tommy's cooking. This wasn't right. Something had been added to this food, and if she served it without saying anything, the man who'd left $20 tips for 20 years might not leave this diner alive. Rosa approached the booth with the plate in her hands, her mind racing faster than her feet could carry her. She couldn't just throw the food away. Danny was watching, and whoever that man in the suit was, he might still be nearby. She couldn't call the police. Not in this neighborhood, not with Mr. Vincent's reputation, not without proof. And she certainly couldn't just tell him straight out. If the wrong person overheard, if Danny panicked, if anything went sideways, she'd be putting herself and maybe even her family at risk. But she also couldn't let him eat poisoned food. As she set the plate down in front of him, her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Rosa Maria, her abuela used to say, when you can't speak the truth out loud, find another way to let it be heard. Rosa had spent her whole life finding ways to communicate in a world that didn't always listen to women like her. She'd learned to read people's faces, to understand what they needed before they asked, to speak in the language of small kindnesses and careful words. Here you go, Mr. Vincent, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. She placed the plate down but kept her hand on the edge of the table. I'm real sorry to tell you this, but the kitchen's out of your favorite dish tonight. Mr. Vincent looked up at her, confused. His eyes moved to the plate of meatloaf sitting right in front of him, steam still rising from the potatoes. Rosa, the meatloaf's right here. She held his gaze, willing him to understand. I know what it looks like, but the kitchen's out of your favorite dish. You understand what I'm saying? Something shifted in his expression. She watched his face transform from confusion to careful attention. Mr. Vincent hadn't survived decades in a dangerous world by being slow to understand warnings. His eyes flickered to the plate, then back to Rosa, then slowly around the diner. He took in Danny standing rigid near the coffee station, the nervous energy radiating from the young man's posture, the way Danny's eyes kept darting to the back door. I see, Mr. Vincent said quietly. He pushed the plate away slightly, his movements casual, unhurried. You know what, Rosa? I'm not as hungry as I thought. How about you just bring me some of that apple pie instead? And maybe sit down for a minute. You look tired. Rosa felt relief wash over her so strongly she thought her knees might give out. That sounds real nice, Mr. Vincent. Let me get that pie for you. She picked up the plate of meatloaf, her hands surprisingly steady now, and walked it back toward the kitchen. Tommy looked up from the grill, surprised. Something wrong with it? Customer changed his mind, Rosa said lightly. You know how it is. She scraped the food into the trash, making sure it went deep into the bin where no one would fish it out. As she turned back toward the dining room with 2 slices of apple pie, she caught Danny staring at her. His face had gone from pale to flushed, his jaw tight with barely controlled panic. Rosa ignored him and walked back to Mr. Vincent's booth. She set down his pie and, taking him up on his offer, slid into the seat across from him, something she'd never done in all the years she'd served him. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what had just happened settling between them like an uninvited guest. That new busboy, Mr. Vincent said softly, picking up his fork. Danny, is it? How long's he been working here? Just over a week, Rosa replied. Seemed like a nice enough kid. Sal hired him because his mother goes to the same church as Sal's wife. Mr. Vincent nodded slowly, taking a bite of pie. Good pie, as always. He paused, then added, You know, Rosa, in all the years I've been coming here, you've never steered me wrong. Not once. I try to take care of my regulars, she said simply. You saved my life tonight. His voice was quiet, but certain. Rosa shook her head. I just told you the kitchen was out of your favorite dish. Yes, he agreed, a sad smile touching his lips. You did. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet, removing several bills and placing them on the table. I need to make a phone call, and Rosa, when I leave here tonight, I think it'd be best if you went home early. Take tomorrow off too. Sal won't mind if I talk to him. Mr. Vincent, please, he said. And something in his eyes made her understand this wasn't a request. This was protection. There are people who'll want to know what happened here tonight. It's better if you're not around for those conversations. Before Rosa could respond, the front door chimed. 3 men walked in, dressed like they'd come from office jobs, but moving with the kind of coordinated awareness that made Rosa think of predators. They didn't look at the menu board or search for an empty table. Their eyes went straight to Mr. Vincent's booth. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. It helps us share more stories like Rosa's with people who need them. Mr. Vincent's face remained calm, but Rosa saw his shoulders tense slightly. He stood up smoothly, buttoning his coat. Thank you for the pie, Rosa. You take care of yourself now. She watched as he walked over to the 3 men, speaking to them in tones too low for her to hear. One of them glanced toward the kitchen, then toward the back door. They moved as a unit, all 4 of them heading toward where Danny was now frantically trying to look busy, wiping down an already clean table. The last thing Rosa saw before Mr. Vincent gently guided her toward the front door with a look was Danny's face going white as snow, the dish rag falling from his shaking hands as he realized he'd been caught. Rosa's hands wouldn't stop shaking even after she'd clocked out and walked the 6 blocks to her apartment. The autumn air was cold against her face, but she barely felt it. All she could think about was Danny's terrified expression and the quiet authority in Mr. Vincent's voice when he'd told her to go home. She'd worked at Sal's for 43 years without incident. She'd served coffee during recessions and celebrations, had watched neighborhoods change and people come and go like seasons. But she'd never been in the middle of something like this. When she unlocked her apartment door, she found her daughter Maria sitting at the kitchen table, which was unusual for a Thursday night. Maria lived across town with her husband and 2 kids, and Thursday was soccer practice night. Mama, Maria said, standing up quickly, I got a call. A man said you needed to take a few days off work, that he'd already talked to Sal, and that someone would be by to make sure you were all right. Rosa sank into the chair across from her daughter, suddenly exhausted. The weight of the evening crashed down on her all at once. Oh, mija, she whispered. What happened? Maria's voice was tight with worry. Mama, who called me? What's going on? Rosa looked at her daughter's concerned face and realized she couldn't tell her everything. How could she explain that she'd saved a man's life tonight? A man whose business involved the kind of darkness most people only saw in movies. How could she make Maria understand that sometimes doing the right thing meant stepping into dangerous waters? Even when you were 65 years old and just wanted to serve pie and go home to your quiet apartment? There was trouble at the diner tonight, Rosa said carefully. Nothing to do with me, really, but I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. It's handled now, but it's better if I stay home for a bit. Maria's eyes filled with tears. Mama, you should quit that place. You've worked there forever. You've given them enough of your life. It's not about owing them, mija. It's about... Rosa paused, searching for the right words. It's about knowing where you belong. Sal's Diner is where I belong. Those people, my regulars, they're like family. Even the dangerous ones? Maria asked pointedly. Rosa thought about Mr. Vincent's kind eyes, the way he always asked about her grandchildren, how he'd left generous tips for decades, never asking for anything in return except a hot meal, and maybe a friendly face at the end of a long day. She thought about how lonely he seemed sometimes, how the world had taken his wife and his daughter had grown distant, and how maybe all he had left were the small rituals that made life bearable, like meatloaf at Sal's Diner on Thursday nights. Even them, Rosa said softly. Maybe especially them? Everyone needs someone to look out for them, Maria. Everyone deserves that small kindness. Over the next 2 days, Rosa stayed home like she'd been told. She baked cookies for her grandchildren, reorganized her closets, and tried not to think about the diner. But her mind kept returning to that Thursday night, to the choice she'd made in a split second, to the code she'd used that might have saved a life. She wondered about Danny, where he was, what had happened to him, whether he'd been a willing participant or a desperate kid who'd gotten in over his head. She wondered about the man in the expensive suit. Most of all, she wondered if she'd ever see Mr. Vincent again. On Saturday afternoon, there was a knock at her door. Rosa looked through the peephole and saw a woman she didn't recognize, middle-aged, with auburn hair and eyes that looked familiar somehow. Rosa opened the door cautiously, keeping the chain lock fastened. "Mrs. Delgado?" the woman asked. Her voice was soft, almost musical. "My name is Catherine Vincent. I think you know my father." Rosa's heart skipped. This was Mr. Vincent's daughter, the one who'd moved away, the one who didn't call much. She unhooked the chain and opened the door wider. "Please come in." Catherine stepped inside, clutching a purse tightly against her chest. "My father called me Thursday night. He told me what you did for him." Her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "I want you to know that I haven't spoken to my father in almost 3 years. I couldn't handle who he was, what he did. I moved to California to get away from all of it. But when he called and told me someone had tried to poison him, that a waitress he'd known for decades had saved his life without asking for anything in return." She paused, wiping at her eyes. "It made me realize I'd been punishing him for trying to survive in the only way he knew how. You didn't judge him. You just saw a person who needed help. Have you ever faced something like this? Choosing between what's easy and what's right? Let us know in the comments below." Rosa reached out and took Catherine's hand. "Your father is a good man," she said simply. "Whatever else he might be, he's a good man who deserves his daughter's love." Catherine squeezed Rosa's hand tightly, and in that moment, Rosa understood that her simple act of kindness had done more than save one life. It had begun to heal a family. On Monday morning, Rosa returned to Sal's diner. The neon sign flickered in the early light, welcoming her back like an old friend. When she pushed through the door, she found Sal himself behind the counter, unusual since he mostly managed from his office these days. "Rosa," he said, his weathered face breaking into a relieved smile. "Thank God you're all right." "I'm fine, Sal. What happened to Danny?" Sal's expression darkened. "He won't be bothering anyone anymore. Turns out he owed money to some very bad people. They told him to do what he did or they'd hurt his mother." He shook his head sadly. "Stupid kid thought he didn't have a choice." Mr. Vincent made sure the people who pressured Danny understood that this neighborhood is off limits now. Danny's working with his uncle in Florida, far away from all this. Rosa felt a wave of relief mixed with sadness. Danny had been caught in circumstances beyond his control, manipulated by people who saw him as expendable. At least now he had a chance to start over, to escape the trap that had almost destroyed both him and Mr. Vincent. "And Mr. Vincent?" Rosa asked quietly. "He's been here every morning since Thursday," Sal said. "Waiting for you. He's in his usual booth." Rosa's heart lifted. She tied on her apron, tucked a fresh pen behind her ear, and picked up the coffee pot. When she approached the booth by the window, Mr. Vincent looked up from his newspaper, and his entire face transformed. The weariness she'd seen on Thursday night had been replaced with something that looked almost like peace. "Rosa," he said warmly, "I was hoping you'd be back today." "Where else would I be?" she replied with a smile, pouring his coffee. "This is home." "I suppose it is," he agreed. Then, more seriously, he added, "I wanted to thank you properly. You didn't have to do what you did." "Yes, I did," Rosa said firmly. "It's who I am. It's what you do for people you care about." Mr. Vincent reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. "This is for you. Please, don't refuse it." Rosa opened the envelope and found a check that made her gasp. The amount would cover her rent for a year, maybe more. "Mr. Vincent, I can't—" "Yes, you can," he said gently. "Rosa, you gave me something more valuable than my life. You gave me back my daughter. Catherine came to see me Friday morning. We talked for hours. She's moving back to the city next month. She wants to get to know me again, to let me be part of her life." His voice grew thick with emotion. "I'd given up hope of ever having that. You didn't just save my life. You gave me a reason to value it again." Rosa felt tears spring to her eyes. She slipped into the booth across from him, just like she had on Thursday night. "I'm so happy for you, Mr. Vincent." "Call me Anthony," he said. "After all these years, I think we can use first names, don't you?" "Anthony," Rosa said, testing the name. It fit him somehow, more human, less mysterious. "I'm glad Catherine came back to you. She told me what you said to her, that I'm a good man who deserves love." "Do you really believe that, Rosa, after everything you must know about me?" Rosa thought about her answer carefully. She looked at this man who'd been a fixture in her life for 2 decades, who'd left generous tips when money was tight, who'd asked about her grandchildren with genuine interest, who'd lost his wife to cancer and his daughter to fear. She thought about the complex nature of people, how we could be many things at once, how circumstances and choices shaped us into complicated creatures who rarely fit into simple categories of good or evil. "I believe that everyone has light and darkness in them," Rosa said slowly. "I believe you've made choices I might not understand, lived a life I'll never know. But I also believe that the man who sits in this booth every week, who leaves kind tips and remembers my grandchildren's names, who lost his wife and missed his daughter, that man is real too. And that man deserves kindness and apple pie, same as anyone else." Anthony's eyes glistened. "You're a remarkable woman, Rosa Delgado." "I'm just a waitress who makes sure her regulars are taken care of," she replied with a gentle smile. If you've been enjoying this story and want to hear more heartwarming tales like Rosa's, please subscribe to our channel. From that day forward, something shifted at Sal's Diner. Anthony came by not just on Thursdays but several times a week. Sometimes Catherine joined him, and Rosa got to see the relationship between father and daughter slowly mend, conversation by conversation, meal by meal. Other regulars noticed the change too, how Anthony smiled more easily, how his shoulders didn't carry quite the same weight, how he'd started to look like a man who'd found his way back from a dark place. And Rosa continued doing what she'd always done, serving coffee and pie, remembering orders, offering kindness to everyone who walked through the door, because in the end, that's what mattered most, not the danger she'd averted, or the dramatic moment when she'd saved a life with 5 simple words. What mattered was the everyday act of seeing people for who they really were, and treating them with dignity and grace. 3 months after that Thursday night, Rosa stood in Sal's Diner early on a Saturday morning, watching the sun paint golden light across the worn vinyl booths. The diner was closed for a private event, something that happened maybe once or twice a year, usually for Sal's family gatherings. But today was different. Today was Rosa's retirement party. She'd finally decided to step away from the work that had defined her adult life. At 65, after 43 years of early mornings and aching feet, of coffee pots and apple pie, she was ready to spend her time differently. She wanted to travel with Maria, to attend every one of her grandchildren's school plays and soccer games, to sleep past 6 in the morning for the first time in decades. The decision hadn't been easy, but it felt right, like closing one chapter so another could begin. The diner filled with people as the morning went on. There were waitresses she'd trained over the years, cooks she'd worked alongside, regular customers who'd been coming in for decades. Mrs. Henderson brought a beautiful cake, decorated with little coffee cups. Tommy gave a speech that made everyone laugh and cry. Sal presented her with a framed photo of the diner from 1981, the year she'd first walked through those doors with nothing but hope and determination. Then Anthony Vincent stepped forward, Catherine by his side. He was dressed nicely, not in his usual dark coat, but in a sport jacket that made him look younger somehow, more at peace. He carried a small wrapped box. "Rosa," he began, his voice steady and warm. "I'm not much for public speaking, but I needed to say this in front of everyone here. You taught me that kindness doesn't require explanations or qualifications. You showed me that seeing someone's humanity is one of the most powerful things we can do for each other." He handed her the box. "This is from Catherine and me, with more gratitude than words can express." Rosa opened the package with trembling fingers. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a small charm, a tiny coffee pot. It was beautiful and simple and perfect. "Oh, Anthony," she whispered. Catherine stepped forward and hugged Rosa tightly. "You gave me my father back," she said softly. "That's a gift I can never repay." The party continued with stories and laughter, with people sharing memories of Rosa's kindness over the years. She learned that she'd been a steady presence in so many lives, not just serving food, but offering encouragement during hard times, celebrating victories, remembering details that made people feel seen and valued. One woman talked about how Rosa had helped her through a divorce by always having a kind word ready. A man recalled how Rosa had saved his favorite booth when his mother was dying, knowing he needed that small comfort. Story after story revealed the quiet impact of a life spent paying attention, caring deeply, and showing up day after day. As the afternoon light began to slant through the windows, Rosa stood at the counter one last time, looking around at the place that had been her second home for so many years. She thought about that Thursday night 3 months ago, about the split-second decision that had changed everything. She'd been frightened in that moment, uncertain if she was doing the right thing. But her grandmother's wisdom had guided her. When you can't speak the truth out loud, find another way to let it be heard. Anthony appeared beside her, his presence companionable and calm. "Any regrets?" he asked. "About that night?" "No," Rosa said firmly. "About retiring? Maybe a few. But it's time. There are other things I want to do with the years I have left." "You'll still come by for coffee sometimes, won't you?" There was genuine concern in his voice. "Of course," Rosa assured him. "You think I'd give up Sal's apple pie completely? Besides, someone needs to make sure you and Catherine keep talking to each other." Anthony laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "You know, that night you saved my life, I realized something. I'd been going through the motions for so long, just surviving day to day, meal to meal. I'd forgotten what it meant to truly live, to be connected to other people. You reminded me." Rosa patted his hand. "We remind each other, Anthony. That's what people do when they care." As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Rosa untied her apron for the last time and hung it on the hook by the kitchen. She said goodbye to Sal, to Tommy, to all the people who'd made this place special. When she finally walked out the door into the cool afternoon air, she wasn't alone. Maria was waiting with the grandkids, and to her surprise, Anthony and Catherine were there too. "We thought you might like some company walking home," Catherine said with a warm smile. "Maybe we could all grab dinner somewhere new? Start a different tradition?" Rosa looked at her daughter, her grandchildren, and these two people whose lives had become unexpectedly intertwined with hers. She thought about how one small act of courage had rippled outward, creating connections and healing wounds in ways she never could have anticipated. Life was strange and beautiful like that, full of moments where everything could change with just 5 simple words, where kindness could save lives and mend families, where a waitress and a dangerous man could recognize each other's humanity across a diner booth. "That sounds wonderful," Rosa said, linking arms with Maria. "Let's start that new tradition together." If you enjoyed Rosa's story, please take a moment to like this video. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts or a time when a small act of kindness changed your life. And subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories. Thank you for spending this time with us. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply see each other, care for each other, and be brave enough to speak up when it matters most. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you in the next story.